Hey guys, tonight we drift into the humid air of southern Nigeria, where the nights are thick with the scent of wet soil and diesel, and the mornings arrive slow, like a sun reluctant to rise over the creeks. In Edo State, the oil fields lie beyond the tree line, their hidden pipelines carrying the lifeblood of the nation beneath ground that feels warm to the touch. Here, a boy named Haruna takes his first steps toward a life he cannot yet imagine. The hum of generators, the soft clink of metal tools against barrels, the whisper of neighbors speaking about things children aren't meant to hear. It's the soundtrack of his childhood. You probably won't survive this world if you walk in blind. Here, a wrong question can end a friendship, and a careless glance can make you disappear from the village gossip entirely. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'd love to know where you're listening from and what time it is there. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Haruna's earliest memories are stitched together by the smell of crude oil drifting in from the direction of the fields. It mingles with wood smoke from evening cooking fires, and to a child's mind, there is nothing strange about this. The oil company trucks pass on the road every few days, white painted, with lettering he can't yet read, and the men riding them never look down at the children who wave. In the village, elders speak in a code that is not taught in school. When an uncle mutters about the lines, he doesn't mean telephone wires. The pump is not for water, but for a well deep enough to drink black gold. Haruna listens from corners, from shadows, his curiosity sharper than his years. Some nights, his father returns late, the soles of his sandals damp with marsh water. No one asks where he's been. The oil companies have guards. The guards have guns. And still, barrels vanish. Tankers change their contents, and money moves quietly into the right hands. Haruna doesn't yet understand how it works, but he sees the difference in those who are connected. Their roofs are newer, their children wear shoes to school, and their wives carry market baskets filled to the brim. On weekends, the boys follow narrow paths through elephant grass, pretending to be explorers. They find sections of pipeline, rusting above ground for a few meters, before dipping back into the earth. Once, Haruna presses his ear against the metal, swearing he can hear something rushing inside. A friend laughs, says it's the sound of money running past them. Even at that age, it feels true. In the wet season, the creeks swell, and the soil turns to sucking mud. The air smells of rot and gasoline. Men in boats slip past the riverbank, their cargo covered with tarps. Haruna knows enough to keep silent, even when the outboard motors cough and leave rainbows of fuel swirling on the water's surface. School is a formality. The lessons are slow, the books worn thin, and the real education happens outside the classroom. Here, a boy learns who to greet first, who to avoid, and how to make his face unreadable. When the local government men visit, they arrive in convoys, their shirts crisp, their smiles wide. They shake hands with the elders, promise new boreholes and paved roads, then vanish until the next election. Haruna watches the way his uncle greets them, not as a supplicant, but as someone who knows the conversation is balanced on unspoken debts. By the time he turns 12, Haruna has walked past enough oil company fences to know where the watchtowers are, where the guards stand lazy in the shade, and where the jungle grows thick enough to swallow a man whole. He's not yet part of the game, but he's learning the board, one square at a time, It's a childhood measured in oil drums and rainy seasons. in whispers over palm wine and the occasional crack of distant gunfire. Haruna grows up knowing that fortune and danger travel the same road here, and sometimes they wear the same face. Haruna's first lessons in survival don't come from any classroom. They unfold in the markets, in the narrow footpaths between fishing huts, in the way his mother haggles without ever looking desperate. Edo's mornings begin before sunrise, with roosters crowing and the rattle of metal basins as women fetch water. By the time the first light reaches the red dust roads, the marketplace is already alive, voices overlapping in a steady hum. His mother teaches him the quiet art of choosing words that cost nothing, but might save you everything. She tells him never to buy from the first stall, never to walk straight to what you want, and never, ever, let your expression reveal if you've been cheated. Haruna learns that survival here isn't just about feeding your body, it's about feeding your chances. Money, when it comes, rarely stays long. Most families live a breath away from empty cupboards. His own household feels that squeeze after a particularly bad wet season when floods wipe out cassava fields. His father, who sometimes takes short-term work at the oil company's outer camps, returns home thin and quieter than usual. Haruna notices that he speaks less at the dinner mat, staring into the dark as if measuring distances no one else can see. In this part of Nigeria, scarcity sharpens people. You learn to stretch a meal with yam flour to mend a sandal 3 times before thinking of new ones. A boy like Haruna understands early that generosity can be a luxury, and trust is a currency you lend sparingly. Still, there are moments when the rules bend. His mother insists on feeding a neighbor's child when she learns the boy hasn't eaten in 2 days. Haruna watches her ladle soup without hesitation, wondering how she can give away what they barely have. Later, she tells him, "A day may come when you'll wish someone had spared you 1 spoon." It's a truth he will carry far into his adult life. Evenings are when lessons shift from the visible to the whispered. Around smoky kerosene lamps, men speak about shortages at the filling stations, about how a truckload of fuel meant for Benin City never arrived. Haruna notices how the adults don't ask too many questions. Curiosity is dangerous if it wanders in the wrong direction. One afternoon, he follows a group of older boys to the edge of the forest. They point out a thin clearing where tire tracks snake off the main road. The air smells faintly of petrol. One of the boys grins and says, "This is where the big men hide what they siphon before it's moved somewhere else." Haruna doesn't fully understand the logistics, but he knows enough to keep the knowledge sealed behind his teeth. By 13, he has mastered the art of appearing uninvolved. If there's trouble in the marketplace, he keeps walking. If 2 men start arguing over missing fuel drums, he doesn't glance twice. Yet, he also learns where to be when something valuable might be passed along. Sometimes a leftover bag of rice, sometimes a small folded note with his name. Life here rewards patience. Haruna learns to wait for the right tide to cross a swollen creek, to time his errands around the arrival of certain traders, to keep his eyes open for shifts in mood before deciding who to greet first. Every decision feels like it carries weight. The older boys in the village sometimes laugh at him for keeping quiet, calling him the listener. They don't realize that Haruna is already practicing the skill that will one day set him apart, knowing more than he says and letting others believe they have the advantage. On the rare evenings when the sky is clear, Haruna lies on his back outside, tracing the constellations his father points out. In those quiet minutes, far from the noise of the market, He wonders what lies beyond the horizon. He doesn't know yet that those same instincts, caution, observation, patience, will guide him through a life where one wrong move could end everything before the next sunrise. Pipeline shadows are part of Haruna's world long before he ever steps into the trade. They run like hidden rivers beneath the soil, guarded by fences and men with rifles, but also stalked by those who see them as opportunity. In the dry season, the grass shrinks low enough for him to spot their faint outlines in the ground, the way the earth above them is just slightly raised. In the wet season, rainwater collects in shallow dips along their route, glistening under the heavy skies. When Haruna is 14, his cousin Musa, 3 years older and already full of swagger, takes him on a walk along one of these stretches. Musa speaks in a half-whisper, pointing out where the lines cross each other, where the valves sit buried. Every place has its weakness, he says, as though pipelines were like men. Haruna keeps pace, eyes tracing the places where the company's security presence thins. The oil companies talk about safety and law, but in the villages, people speak of the lines like they're prey to be hunted. Haruna overhears older men talk about tapping points, crude fittings welded in secret during the night. He hears stories of barrels vanishing before they reach the official depots, of small crews who work fast and disappear before dawn. One evening, as he walks home from the market, Haruna sees a flicker of light deep in the bush. Curious, he drifts closer, careful to stay in the shadows. Through the leaves, he glimpses 3 men crouched over a section of exposed pipe. A faint hiss rides the air, and he catches the sharp, metallic scent of crude. One man works quickly with a wrench, while the other 2 keep watch. They speak in low bursts, their urgency clear. Haruna memorizes every movement, every tool in their hands. The thing about pipelines is that they don't belong to anyone who lives near them, at least not officially. But for the communities that see wealth flow past their doorsteps while they fetch water from muddy streams, there's a quiet belief that the oil is as much theirs as anyone else's. Haruna hears this sentiment often. If it runs through our land, it runs through our lives. Still, the shadows are dangerous. Musa tells him about a boy from a nearby village who tried to follow a crew one night and never came back. Some say the boy got lost and drowned in the marsh. Others insist the crew made sure he wouldn't talk. Haruna listens without comment, filing the warning away. On Sundays, when the company trucks pass in convoy, Haruna watches them from the roadside. The drivers stare straight ahead, ignoring the children. Each truck carries its load under heavy tarps, the kind that snap in the wind. The men in the passenger seats wear dark glasses even when the sky is overcast. To Haruna, it's all theater, the kind meant to project power, to hide the fact that even in all this security, there are leaks the size of opportunity. Years later, he will think back to these walks with Musa, to the hiss of oil under moonlight, to the way danger seemed to hum just beneath the surface of the ground. Back then, it was all observation, no action. But already, the shadows were showing him the map he would one day walk for real. He doesn't yet know it, but the men he sees out in the bush, faces obscured by cloth, hands quick and sure, will be the kind of men he deals with as equals. And the skill he's practicing now, of standing close enough to see but far enough not to be noticed, will become one of his most valuable tools. For now, though, he remains the boy at the edge of the clearing, watching the shadows work while the night folds around them, holding its breath. The uncle's quiet warning comes on a night when the village feels hushed in a way Haruna can't quite name. The air is heavy, the lantern flames flicker with every stray breeze, and the conversations in the yard are softer than usual. Haruna's Uncle Ibrahim, a man who speaks little but commands attention without trying, sits cross-legged near the doorway. His eyes track Haruna as he comes back from delivering palm oil to a neighbor. Ibrahim isn't the kind of man to scold openly. When he wants you to remember something, he doesn't shout. He plants it like a seed that grows on its own. He gestures for Haruna to sit. "You walk too close to certain things," he says quietly. Haruna frowns, not sure which things he means, but the weight in his uncle's tone makes him keep silent. Ibrahim looks toward the tree line, where the darkness beyond the lantern's glow seems thicker. The lines feed some men and bury others. If you can't tell which it will do for you, keep your distance. He says it like he's speaking from somewhere far older than his years, a place where he has seen too many endings. Haruna wants to ask questions. How close is too close? What distance is safe? But he's already learning that in this village, answers often come too late to help. So he nods instead, watching Ibrahim's weathered hands as the man rubs his palms slowly, as if wiping away the residue of work done long ago. Later that night, Haruna overhears his father and Ibrahim talking in the outer yard. Their voices are low, but a few words carry through. Youth, temptations, crew trouble in the delta. Haruna catches the tone more than the meaning. It's the sound of men agreeing that danger is circling over the next few weeks. Ibrahim makes a quiet habit of keeping Haruna busy with small errands that take him in the opposite direction of the pipeline paths. Sometimes it's delivering groundnut oil to the market. Other times it's carrying a letter to a friend in the next village. Haruna suspects it's less about the errands and more about keeping his feet away from places he's been curious to explore, but curiosity is stubborn. On market days, when traders arrive from towns farther south, Haruna hears stories of quick fortunes and sudden disappearances. A fish seller claims her cousin bought a motorcycle after just one job moving cargo for men who paid in US dollars. Another trader whispers about someone found in the mangroves, his pockets full, but his breath gone. These half-told tales pull at Haruna's imagination, even as his uncle's warning tugs the other way. One Sunday afternoon, Haruna helps Ibrahim repair a section of their compound fence. Between hammer strikes, Ibrahim glances at him and says, "A man's name is a thread. Once you tangle it with the wrong ones, you spend the rest of your life pulling knots." It's a metaphor Haruna will remember years later when his own name starts moving in circles where oil and politics share the same room. That night, as rain begins to drum on the tin roof, Haruna lies awake, listening. He thinks about the men who vanish, the ones who come back with money, and the uncle who seems to know too much, but says just enough. The darkness outside is deep, but somewhere under the soil, those lines keep humming, carrying their quiet promise and their unspoken threat through the sleeping land. Haruna's first trip to Lagos is not the grand adventure he imagines. It's a trial by noise, speed, and sheer scale. He is 16, traveling with his father on a battered commercial bus that leaves before dawn from Benin City. The driver swears they'll reach Lagos by mid-afternoon, but the reality is hours of stop-and-go traffic, police checkpoints, and side-of-the-road repairs that leave passengers fanning themselves in the heat. As the bus finally crosses the long bridge toward the city, Haruna sees a horizon unlike anything at home. Skyscrapers jutting out of the haze, billboards taller than palm trees, and a tangle of overpasses stacked like some restless child's toy set. The air smells of fuel and fried plantains, and the constant blare of horns feels like the city's heartbeat. They stay with a distant cousin in Surulere, a neighborhood that never seems to sleep. Streetlights buzz all night, and the hum of generators blends with laughter from beer parlors. Haruna spends his first evening just watching from the balcony, men in suits stepping out of tinted cars, boys pushing wheelbarrows loaded with goods, women in bright headscarves weaving between them with the easy agility of those who know the rhythm of the place. Lagos is where the machinery of money is on full display. Haruna sees it in the port, where cranes lift containers marked with foreign names, in the banks with glass facades, and in the bustling markets where imported electronics and second-hand clothes sell faster than yams. His father points out the towers where oil companies keep their offices. Names Haruna has only seen on the sides of fuel trucks back home now loom above him in polished steel. But it's not just the formal side of business that catches his attention. In the back streets, Haruna notices quick exchanges of cash between men leaning on parked cars. He sees small crowds gathered around someone selling original fuel in yellow jerry cans, the liquid's color catching the sunlight like molten gold. His cousin tells him this is off-grid petrol, cheaper, faster to get, and sometimes riskier to use. One afternoon, they walk past the dockside warehouses, and Haruna glimpses a group of men unloading drums from a truck with unusual haste. A short man in a fine shirt directs them with clipped gestures, his voice low but firm. Haruna watches the precision of it all. No wasted movement, no questions asked. It's a different kind of choreography than the market stalls, but just as deliberate. The city shows him how influence moves, sometimes loudly in boardrooms, sometimes quietly in alleyways. He begins to understand that the oil trade isn't just a matter of pipelines and valves. It's also about handshakes, favors, and knowing exactly who to call when the police decide your paperwork isn't enough. At night, lying on a thin mattress in his cousin's spare room, Haruna listens to the hum of Lagos beyond the shutters. The city never truly rests. Somewhere out there, trucks are rolling, deals are being made, and fortunes are shifting hands before the sun comes up. He doesn't know it yet, but this first trip will plant in him a hunger, not just for money, but for the kind of reach that can move things unseen, the way Lagos seems to do without ever breaking stride. Learning the routes begins as an exercise in curiosity and turns into an education that Haruna knows he should not have, but cannot resist. Back in Edo, after his brief taste of Lagos, he starts paying closer attention to the comings and goings of the trucks that pass through the region. Some are painted with oil company logos, others with names that mean nothing to the casual observer, but to those who watch closely, they form part of a larger pattern. He notices which trucks slow before certain bends in the road, where the bush grows thick enough to hide more than birds, and which paths local boys use to cross from one village to another without touching the main road. At first, he's just mapping in his head, silent mental notes of times, colors, and plate numbers. But soon, Musa is walking beside him again, filling in the gaps. Musa explains that the pipelines stretch far beyond Edo, cutting across rivers, forests, and even under farmland where no one suspects they pass. From here, they run to Wari, to Port Harcourt, even all the way up to depots in the north, Musa says, drawing imaginary lines in the dirt with a stick. If you know the land, you can reach them anywhere. The routes aren't just physical. They're networks of trust and timing. Some involve boats navigating the maze-like waterways of the Niger Delta. gliding between mangroves with cargo hidden under fishing nets. Others take advantage of back roads, the kind with more potholes than pavement, where no one bothers to check what's in the truck bed. Haruna learns that every segment of the journey has its own specialists: the tap crews who extract the crude, the loaders who transfer it, the drivers who know how to bluff their way through checkpoints, and the sellers who turn barrels into cash. Walking home one evening, Haruna and Musa come across a narrow track leading into the bush. Musa stops, scanning the ground like a hunter. He points to faint tire marks, fresh enough to still hold their shape after last night's rain. "That's not from a farmer's truck," Musa says. "That's a root." Haruna feels a pulse of adrenaline. There's a thrill in recognizing something hidden in plain sight. Over the months, Haruna begins to anticipate movement before it happens. He can guess when a section of pipeline is due for a tap based on the mood in the market, the sudden appearance of unfamiliar men in town, or the subtle way certain elders avoid eye contact. Sometimes entire stretches go quiet, and Haruna knows that somewhere else along the line, a job is being prepared. This knowledge doesn't make him reckless. It makes him patient. He understands now that timing is everything. A shipment that moves too soon draws attention. One that moves too late risks being intercepted by rivals or law enforcement. It's a dance that requires precision, and Haruna is already learning the steps without ever setting foot in the circle. One night, he sits by the river, watching lanterns sway on the bows of small fishing boats. He traces the imagined path of crude oil from the hidden tap point in the bush, down narrow tracks to the water, onto boats, and finally into the hands of buyers who will move it to places he's never seen. The routes are like veins, and the product is the blood, flowing in a system that keeps many people alive, even if it's never acknowledged in the open. By the time he's 17, Haruna knows more about these routes than most men twice his age. He hasn't yet used this knowledge, but it's there, waiting, like a map tucked in his mind, ready for the day someone hands him the chance to follow it to its end. A deal by the river is where Haruna first learns what profit feels like when it comes from something half hidden. The evening is warm, the kind where the air clings to the skin, and the river moves slow under the weight of the rainy season's tail. He's there at Musa's request, carrying nothing more suspicious than a sack of smoked fish, the kind a boy might sell to travelers or pass to a family friend. They wait in the shadows near a dock where dugout canoes sway against the current. Across the water, the mangroves form a wall of black-green, their roots twisting like knotted fingers. Musa says little, keeping his eyes on the bend upstream. Haruna does the same, feeling the damp of the wooden planks seep into the soles of his sandals. The first boat appears as a silhouette, gliding without sound until the motor coughs once to signal arrival. Two men step out, their movements brisk but unhurried. One carries a small jerry can, the other a bundle wrapped in old cloth. They greet Musa in low tones, the exchange of words shorter than the sound of water lapping against the hull. Musa nods at Haruna. The boy steps forward, handing over the sack of smoked fish. In return, the bundle is placed in his hands. It's heavier than he expects. Inside, wrapped in more layers of cloth, is a set of tools and fittings used for tapping a pipeline. Haruna doesn't need to be told what they are. He's seen enough from the shadows over the years. They don't linger. Musa takes the bundle and leads Haruna back up the narrow path to where a motorbike waits. Only when they are well away from the river does Musa speak. "This will fetch more than a month's work in town," he says. Haruna feels the truth of it in the way Musa's voice carries both satisfaction and caution. A few days later, Musa hands him an envelope. Inside are crisp Naira notes, more than Haruna has ever held at once. It's his share for doing little more than being present, for walking the route without asking questions. The weight of the money in his pocket feels different from any coin earned in the market. It's lighter in the hand, heavier in the mind. In the days that follow, Haruna notices how quickly that money moves. He buys new sandals for his mother, a small radio for the house, and contributes quietly to the repair of a neighbor's leaking roof. No one asks where the funds come from. Perhaps they know. Perhaps they prefer not to. In the village, gratitude rarely comes with investigation. The deal by the river is not about the tools themselves. It's about the signal. Haruna has shown he can be trusted to play a part, however small. Musa doesn't say it outright, but the look he gives Haruna afterward says enough. You stepped into the circle, and you walked out the same way you went in, silent and steady. That night, lying under the slow-turning blades of the ceiling fan, Haruna thinks about the boat's silent approach, the cold weight of the bundle, the hum of the motorbike carrying them away. It's not danger he feels, not exactly. It's something sharper, like the edge of a new road under his feet. He understands now that profit doesn't always come with fanfare. Sometimes it's exchanged in the quiet at the river's edge, under the cover of fading light, with nothing more than a nod to mark the moment when one life tilts just slightly toward another path. Friends who vanish are a fact of life in Haruna's world, but it's only when it happens to people he knows well that the reality starts to settle into his bones. In the years after that quiet deal by the river, he notices a pattern. Boys he grew up with, faces that once laughed beside him at the market or raced him to the edge of the bush, begin to disappear without farewell. It happens slowly, almost politely, as though the village doesn't want to make a fuss. Someone's bed remains neatly folded for weeks. A mother says her son went to work in Port Harcourt and is too busy to write. An uncle mutters about an opportunity in the north, his tone stiff with finality. No one asks when they'll be back. The first time it strikes close is with Emeka, a wiry boy 2 years older than Haruna, known for his restless energy and a talent for fixing engines. 1 month, Emeka is seen riding in the back of a truck headed toward the delta, his grin as wide as ever. The next month, the truck is back, but he's not in it. People talk about a police raid on an illegal depot, about gunfire in the mangroves, but no one can confirm if Emeka was even there. His mother begins locking her door during the day, as if the silence inside might keep her from breaking. Then there's Bako, who used to skip school with Haruna to watch the riverboats load and unload. One evening, Bako is at the market, pockets full of cash, boasting about a big job that paid double. By the following week, his house is empty. Some say he left for Ghana. Others claim he was taken by men in unmarked vehicles. Both stories are told with the same shrug, as if the details don't matter. Haruna learns to read the warning signs. Friends who suddenly start dressing better, who spend more time near the transport yards, who talk in shorter sentences. Their eyes shift in ways that say they're holding on to secrets heavier than they can carry. And when they vanish, the village adjusts its balance quickly, like a table leg wedged under a rock. There's no space for lingering grief when survival demands focus. Musa offers his own version of advice one night while they sit by the roadside, watching motorbikes flash past. If a man is gone, don't follow his trail, he says. The best you'll find is trouble that still remembers your name. Haruna nods, though inside he wonders if the trail could also lead to understanding why the risks are worth it for some. and why others never returned to spend the money they risked their lives to make. Over time, Haruna stops asking after those who vanish. It's not callousness, but self-preservation. In this trade, absence is an unspoken boundary. Crossing it with questions can draw the kind of attention that has no patience for answers. Still, their faces stay with him, sometimes surfacing in dreams where the river runs backward and the missing walk the banks like they never left. Each absence sharpens his awareness that the path he's watching, sometimes walking, is not a straight road. It bends sharply, disappears into thickets, and ends without warning. But by now, Haruna is too far into its edges to turn away. Entering the network happens without ceremony. No oath, no handshake under a bare bulb. Just a shift in how people speak to Haruna, in what errands they trust him with. It begins when Musa introduces him to two men at a roadside beer parlor, their table cluttered with sweating bottles and the scent of grilled suya drifting through the air. The older of the two is called OJ, a man with the calm demeanor of someone used to moving large amounts of money without ever counting it in public. The younger, Idef, has quick eyes and a voice that rises and falls like he's testing how much the room can hear. Musa says nothing about what they do, but Haruna doesn't need the details. He can tell from the way they speak in layers, always leaving a sentence unfinished, that they are in the business of oil. The first task they give him is as simple as carrying an envelope to a hardware shop in town. He is told not to open it, not to wait for a reply. Just hand it to a man wearing a red cap behind the counter. When Haruna returns, OJ nods once and says, "Good." No praise, no payment. Just the recognition that he did exactly what he was told. Weeks later, he is asked to accompany Idef on a drive to a small village along the river. They carry nothing but a jerry can of fuel and a few sealed packages wrapped in plastic. Haruna sits in the passenger seat, watching the road curve between fields and forest, learning which stretches are patrolled by police and which are left alone. At the destination, the packages are handed over to two men in faded oil company coveralls. In return, they receive a set of keys and a paper slip marked with numbers. What Haruna is beginning to see is that the network isn't a single crew. It's an overlapping web of favors, debts, and silent understandings. The same man might work for an oil company by day and for a tapping crew at night. The same truck that hauls legitimate cargo on Monday might carry unregistered barrels on Thursday. Lines blur, not just in the dirt, but in the loyalties of the people moving along them. His role at this stage is low level, carrying messages, making introductions, showing up where Musa says he's needed. But it's enough to give him a seat close to conversations that would have been shut down in his presence just a year earlier. He hears about storage tanks hidden under fishing sheds, about bribes passed in envelopes marked as maintenance costs, about deals arranged to move stolen crude alongside legitimate shipments so no one notices the extra weight. One night, sitting in the back of a small bar near the river, Haruna listens as OJ talks about a pipeline stretch that will be shut down for repairs next week. "That's when we move," OJ says. "Noise covers the signal." Haruna understands. If the company expects pressure drops during maintenance, they won't notice the difference between repairs and theft. By the time the evening ends, Haruna realizes he's crossed a quiet threshold. He's no longer just Musa's younger cousin tagging along. He's part of the moving pieces. Small, maybe, but in motion. The network has accepted him, not with ceremony, but with trust, measured in tasks too sensitive for outsiders. And somewhere inside, He feels the first stirrings of a truth he will carry for years. In this world, inclusion is both opportunity and obligation. Once you are inside, you're expected to keep the wheels turning, whether you like the direction or not. The first shipment south is a test disguised as routine. Haruna is told nothing about its full value, only that he will travel with Adaf to make sure the truck arrives where it should. The journey begins at dusk, when the heat softens and the roads hold fewer eyes. The truck is an old flatbed with reinforced sides, its cargo hidden under a double layer of tarpaulin tied so tight it hums when the wind catches it. They leave the main road within the first hour, following a series of back routes that Haruna recognizes from Musa's earlier lessons. Each turn is deliberate, as though Adaf is reading a map no one can see. In the cab, the air smells of dust and faint diesel. The radio stays off. Silence feels safer. The checkpoints start after nightfall. The first is manned by 2 uniformed officers with rifles slung over their shoulders. Adaf slows, exchanges a few words, and slips a folded note into the hand of the older one. The barrier lifts without inspection. The second checkpoint is trickier. 4 men in mismatched fatigues, their eyes sharper. They circle the truck, tapping the tarpaulin with their palms. One asks what they're carrying. "Building materials," Adaf answers, his tone calm enough to sound bored. A smaller note changes hands, and they wave the truck through. Hours later, they reach a riverside yard lit by a single flickering bulb. The sound of water slapping against wooden pilings fills the air. A crew of men appears from the shadows, moving with practiced speed. Tarps are peeled back, just enough for Haruna to see the dark metal curve of drums, oil, packed tight in rows. The men lift each one with mechanical efficiency, rolling them down planks into waiting boats. No one speaks louder than necessary. Haruna's role is to keep count, matching each drum to the numbers on a scrap of paper Adaf hands him. The process takes less than 20 minutes, and then the boats slip away into the black water, lanterns bobbing like fireflies. Adaf checks the paper twice, folds it, and tucks it into his jacket. On the return trip, Haruna notices the subtle difference in Adaf's driving, more relaxed, as if the heaviest part of the night is behind them. He says little, but when they pass the first faint glow of dawn on the horizon, Adaf finally speaks. "You kept your eyes open and your mouth shut. That's the job." Back in Edo, Haruna receives a small envelope from Musa a day later. Inside is his payment, modest by the standards of what he suspects the shipment was worth, but significant to him. He knows it's not about the money this time. It's about proof. He's shown he can be trusted under the weight of a real operation. That night, as he lies awake listening to the distant hum of generators, Haruna replays the journey in his mind. The checkpoints, the river, the quiet rhythm of men moving barrels into boats. It felt less like crime and more like choreography, every step rehearsed until it became instinct. And somewhere in that rhythm, he felt himself fall into step, not as an outsider watching from the edge, but as part of the dance. Skimming in silence becomes Haruna's quiet initiation into the deeper layers of the trade. By now, he has earned the right to be present during certain transfers, the kind where barrels are moved from truck to boat, from boat to warehouse, without anyone writing a receipt. On the surface, everything looks routine. Men working under lantern light, numbers called out in even tones, paperwork signed in duplicate. But within that order, there is room for subtraction. It begins when Adaf pulls him aside after a small run to the outskirts of Wari. Sometimes, Edaf says, you take a little off the top, not enough to make anyone check the books, but enough to remind yourself you're not just a messenger. He explains the rule. Never touch the core shipment. Never move in full view of a foreman, and always make sure the missing volume can be explained by spillage, evaporation, or dock error. Haruna's first attempt is simple. During a transfer at a riverside depot, he notes that one of the marked drums is slightly dented. He makes sure it gets placed on the damaged side, and later, under the cover of darkness, it is rolled into a separate canoe, headed in the opposite direction. By morning, it's already on a truck bound for a buyer who will pay cash. No questions asked. The profit is small, but the satisfaction is sharp. Skimming isn't just about extra income. It's about proving he can operate without hand-holding. In this business, independence is currency. Over the months, he refines the practice. Sometimes it's a single drum lifted from the far end of a stack. Sometimes a few jerry cans siphoned during a late-night stop. The key is subtlety. Taking so little that even if someone notices, they chalk it up to the ordinary losses of moving crude through rough country. There's risk, of course. Haruna hears stories of men who got greedy, who took enough to make someone up the chain start counting twice. Those men either vanished or reappeared in whispers about what happens when you steal from the wrong people. He keeps those stories close, letting them temper any temptation to overreach. One evening, while sharing a quiet drink in the corner of a crowded beer parlor, OJ nods toward him and says, "You're learning the game the right way. Slow hands keep you alive." Haruna doesn't answer, but the words settle deep. In a trade where violence is often one mistake away, being unremarkable can be its own kind of armor. Yet even in silence, skimming changes the way he sees the work. He notices inefficiencies, weaknesses in record keeping, moments when the chaos of a transfer offers cover. He starts thinking ahead, marking in his mind the opportunities that will be worth more when he has the power to take them without asking. For now, the extra money goes mostly unnoticed. He fixes the family's leaky roof, replaces his mother's radio when it dies, and quietly pays school fees for his younger sister without explaining how. These small acts keep suspicion away and remind him why he's doing this in the first place. Late at night, he lies awake in the humid dark, the hum of insects outside mixing with the distant echo of boat engines on the river. He knows he's still a small piece in a much larger system, but with every silent skim, he's testing the edges of how far he can move without the system noticing. And one day, he tells himself, that skill might be the only thing that keeps him from becoming just another name, whispered as gone. The Abuja introduction comes like a sudden change in altitude. One day, Haruna is watching oil drums roll into boats on the delta, and the next, he is stepping into the air-conditioned hush of Nigeria's political capital. It starts with OJ, who tells him there's a meeting worth attending, but gives no details until they are already on the road north. Abuja is not like Edo or Lagos. Where Lagos moves in chaotic rhythms, Abuja feels curated, broad avenues lined with neat hedges, glass-fronted buildings shimmering in the sun, uniformed guards at every gate. Even the traffic seems disciplined, a quiet hum instead of the aggressive blare Haruna has grown used to. The meeting is in a restaurant inside a discreet hotel, the kind where the lobby smells faintly of imported polish, and the staff greet OJ by name. They are shown to a private dining room with thick curtains and soundproof walls. Waiting inside is a man in a tailored navy suit, flanked by two aides who stand as still as furniture. OJ calls him honorable, a title Haruna knows enough to treat with weight. The honorable doesn't waste time. Over a lunch of pepper soup and rice, he talks about logistics and smooth operations, his words skimming over the details like a stone skipping water. Haruna understands this language. It's the kind designed to hide specifics while making sure everyone knows exactly what's being discussed. The Honorable's main concern is that certain shipments keep moving without attracting federal attention. And for that, he needs reliable people along the line. OJ vouches for Haruna with a simple sentence. He's been tested. No one asks for specifics. In this circle, a recommendation from the right voice carries more weight than any paperwork. The Honorable nods once, studying Haruna like he's deciding where the boy might fit in the machinery. When the meeting ends, one of the aides slips OJ a slim brown envelope. Haruna catches a glimpse inside. Cash, neat stacks bound with rubber bands. Back in their hotel room, OJ hands Haruna a smaller envelope. For making the trip, he says. Haruna knows better than to count it in front of him. That night, from his hotel window, Haruna looks out over Abuja's glowing skyline. The city feels like a different country. Cleaner streets, taller buildings, fewer visible cracks. But he also senses that beneath its polished surface, the same currents flow here as in the Delta. Currents of oil, money, and power, only dressed in finer clothes. The Abuja introduction changes more than just his geography. It gives him a glimpse of the upper layer of the network, where deals are made over quiet meals, instead of under flickering bulbs in dockyards. It shows him that the men in suits need the men in the bush just as much as the other way around, and that someone who can move comfortably between both worlds will always have leverage. On the drive back south, OJ says nothing for the first 2 hours. Then, as they pass into Kogi's state, he glances at Haruna and says, "In this business, the person who introduces you to power owns a part of you. Remember that, and decide early how much of yourself you're willing to give." Haruna stores the warning alongside Ibrahim's old words about the lines feeding some men and burying others. Abuja has fed him today, but he knows the same city could bury him tomorrow if he steps wrong. Turning middleman happens so gradually that Haruna almost misses the moment when it stops being occasional help and becomes a role with its own weight. It begins with small favors, connecting a boat crew in the Delta to a driver in Wari, introducing a supplier with surplus to a buyer who can pay in cash. At first, he's just passing names, nothing more. But each successful link brings a quiet payment, and each payment reinforces his place in the chain. The real shift comes when OJ is away for nearly a month, leaving certain contacts restless. Instead of waiting for his return, Haruna starts handling calls himself. He listens, asks the right questions, and pairs people off in ways that keep both sides satisfied. It's simple matchmaking, except the matches involve stolen crude, falsified bills of lading, and shipments threaded through legal cargo. Being the middleman means more than connecting people. It means managing trust. Both sides must believe he's looking out for them, even when their interests clash. Haruna learns to keep his tone calm when tempers rise, to let silence linger just long enough to make the other man talk first. In a world where suspicion can end a deal, or a life, his ability to project steady confidence becomes as valuable as the oil itself. He doesn't touch the product directly now. Instead, he touches the flow, arranging the when, the where, the who. The barrels move, the cash moves, and he stays in the middle, far enough from the mud to keep his shoes clean, close enough to feel the heat from the work. Of course, middlemen are tempting targets. Rivals see him as a point of leverage. Authorities see him as a source of names. Haruna adapts by making himself less visible. He avoids public displays of wealth, dresses plainly, and travels without fanfare. His phone is a revolving cast of prepaid numbers, each discarded after a handful of calls. The benefits, though, are undeniable. His earnings multiply without the risks of standing at a tap point in the dark. He gains access to information before it spreads. News of planned crackdowns, shifts in security patrols, or foreign buyers looking to purchase larger volumes. Sometimes the information alone is worth more than the cut from a shipment. One evening, at a quiet roadside joint, Musa leans back in his chair and studies him. "You've moved up," Musa says. "Now they call you when they want something done. That's power, but it's also the point where you start making enemies you can't see." Haruna nods. He knows Musa is right. The middle is a position of balance but also of exposure. Lean too far in any direction and the fall is quick. Still, the role fits him. The boy who once stood at the river's edge watching from the shadows now shapes the routes without stepping on them. The game hasn't changed. It's just that now, he's moving the pieces instead of being one. And somewhere deep down, he understands that this vantage point is both an advantage and a warning. From here, you can see everything coming if you're wise enough to look. Rival crew trouble creeps in like a slow leak, easy to ignore at first, then impossible to stop. It begins with a dispute over a stretch of backwater channel used to move drums from a hidden tap point to the main river. Haruna's side has been using it for months without issue, paying the right locals, keeping traffic low and quiet. But suddenly, another crew appears, running boats through the same path, their cargo stacked high and their guards not bothering to hide their rifles. The first sign of real friction comes when one of Haruna's boatmen reports being stopped mid-channel by men he doesn't recognize. They search his cargo, claim the route now belongs to them, and demand a payment to pass. It's not an official toll, just intimidation with the edge of a machete. Haruna listens to the account in silence, his jaw tight. For a week, both crews try to avoid direct confrontation. But oil is money, and money doesn't share easily. One evening, Haruna hears that a drum meant for his buyers has gone missing between the tap site and the holding yard. Then another. The losses are small in volume, but large in meaning. They're a message, and not a subtle one. He meets with Musa and Idef in a dimly lit bar near the port. Over warm beer, they go through options, negotiate, retaliate, or reroute. Musa favors force, muttering that a show of teeth will end it quickly. Idef warns that violence will draw the kind of security attention they've avoided for years. Haruna listens, then says they'll start with conversation, if only to buy time to prepare for worse. The meeting with the rival crew takes place on neutral ground, a half-abandoned warehouse where the smell of salt and old diesel hangs heavy in the air. Their leader, a man called Osas, wears a grin too wide to be friendly. Words are exchanged, but they circle without touching the real issue. Osas claims he's just using open water. Haruna counters that certain channels have understandings attached to them. Neither side concedes. Leaving the warehouse, Haruna knows the problem isn't solved. It's simply paused. That night, he sits alone in his apartment, thinking of Ibrahim's old warning about the lines feeding some men and burying others. A rival crew can be more dangerous than the authorities because they play by rules that change without notice. Within weeks, more small disruptions follow. A shipment delayed by a mysterious engine failure. A buyer suddenly refusing to pay full price after hearing whispers about quality. Haruna sees the pattern. Death by 1,000 cuts, meant to push him off the route entirely. The temptation to hit back is strong, but he holds it in check. Retaliation will come, but it has to be timed, precise, and deniable. In the meantime, he starts probing for the rival crew's weak points, their supply sources, their trusted pilots, the buyers they can't afford to lose. If they want to play slow, he can play slower, longer. Rival crew trouble has no clean end. It's a thread that frays everything it touches, and Haruna knows that before it's over, one side will bleed in ways that can't be hidden. The only question is how much of that bleeding he can make happen without leaving his own fingerprints on the knife. The night watch deal unfolds under a sky so black it swallows the horizon. Haruna has arranged for a high-risk transfer, a batch of drums pulled from a newly tapped line, moving under the cover of darkness to avoid both rival crews and patrol boats. The location is a narrow inlet, its banks lined with mangroves that drip with brackish water. The kind of place where sound travels differently, muffled yet sharp, like it knows it's carrying secrets. This job needs more than muscle. It needs assurance. So Haruna hires a pair of local night watchmen, not the kind who guard shops, but the kind whose eyes can pick out movement across water, even in pitch dark. These are men who've lived their lives along the creeks, who can tell the difference between the sound of a fish breaking the surface and the dip of a paddle in the water. They arrive just after sundown, wearing faded jackets despite the heat. Each carries an old shotgun, more for show than for sustained fire, but their real weapon is familiarity. They know every twist of the inlet, every blind corner where trouble might slip in. Haruna greets them briefly, then outlines the plan. The transfer will take less than 40 minutes, but they'll need to hold the inlet clear for at least an hour. The first boats arrive on time, pushed by quiet outboard motors. Barrels are rolled down makeshift planks, each thud swallowed by the damp air. Haruna stands at the edge, counting, nodding, keeping his eyes on the tree line. Every few minutes, one of the watchmen signals, just a tilt of the head, a subtle flick of the wrist, to let him know the waterway is still theirs. Midway through, a distant engine growls from beyond the bend. The watchmen react instantly, slipping into their canoe and pushing off into the dark. Haruna keeps the transfer moving, though every muscle in his body tightens. 10 minutes later, the engine fades and the watchmen return, their expressions unreadable. "Just fishermen," one says, but Haruna catches the way his eyes linger on the shadowed bend. When the last barrel is loaded, the boats pull away in staggered intervals, each disappearing into the black water without leaving a wake. The watchmen remain until the inlet is empty, then step back onto the bank. Haruna counts out their payment in cash, handing it over without ceremony. They nod once, pocket the bills, and vanish into the mangroves as quietly as they came. Walking back to his truck, Haruna feels the relief settle in his chest. Not the exhilaration of a close call, but the quiet satisfaction of a plan executed without noise. The night watch deal has bought him safe passage tonight, but more importantly, it's bought him a relationship. In this world, having the right eyes in the dark can be the difference between profit and a name scratched off the ledger. As the inlet disappears behind him, he thinks again of the engine that came too close, of the way the watchmen moved without hesitation. He knows he'll hire them again, not just because they can keep danger at bay, but because they've shown they know when not to ask questions. Abuja apartment life is nothing like the heat and noise of the Delta. When Haruna first moves into the 2-bedroom flat in the city's quieter district, the silence feels almost unnatural. The streets outside are lined with jacaranda trees, their purple blossoms falling onto well-kept sidewalks. Security guards sit in small booths at the gates, their radios crackling softly. The air smells less of diesel and river mud here, more of rain on concrete and the faint perfume from the tailor shop down the street. The apartment itself is modest by Abuja standards, but to Haruna, it feels like a step into another world. The furniture is clean-lined, the air conditioning hums softly, and the water runs clear from the taps. From his balcony, he can see the glow of the city center in the distance, the skyline dotted with the lights of ministries, embassies, and hotel towers. Abuja changes his routines. Here, he can meet contacts in air-conditioned cafes instead of roadside bars. Conversations happen over cappuccinos instead of lukewarm beer. Deals are framed as consultancy arrangements or logistics partnerships, the language scrubbed clean, but carrying the same weight as any whispered agreement in the creeks. Haruna quickly learns that the capital has its own rhythm, a slower pulse on the surface, but with currents moving deep below. He notices that in Abuja, people watch how you arrive. Cars are a kind of resume, and Haruna invests in a used black Prado SUV, not flashy enough to invite suspicion, but solid enough to suggest he belongs in certain parking lots. Inside the apartment, he keeps the decor deliberately simple. No stacks of cash lying around, no obvious signs of sudden wealth. If anyone comes looking, they should see a man doing well, not a man doing too well. Nights are quieter here, but they are also more strategic. Haruna spends hours on the balcony with his phone, making calls that connect the bush to the boardroom. He talks to a boat operator in Bielsa, then a buyer in Port Harcourt, then a political aide whose voice is always low, even when discussing the weather. The apartment becomes less a home and more a command post, a place where he can think without the constant hum of risk pressing in from every side. But Abuja is not without its own hazards. The city has eyes, government ones, rival ones, and those of opportunists looking to climb. Haruna adapts by blending into the fabric of professional respectability. He dresses in well-pressed shirts, attends networking events where oil executives mingle with policymakers, and never stays in any one bar or restaurant long enough to become part of the furniture. One evening, as rain streaks the glass of his balcony doors, Haruna realizes something about this stage of his life. In the Delta, danger came fast and obvious. A motorboat engine in the dark, a rival crew's sudden claim on a route. In Abuja, danger comes dressed in tailored suits, carrying polite smiles and offering you deals that can outlast your freedom. For now, the apartment is both shield and stage. From here, he can look like a man on the legitimate side of the oil industry, while still pulling threads that reach deep into the marshes and mangroves. But Haruna knows better than to think the city's quiet will last forever. The first political favor Haruna grants begins almost innocently, just a request passed through a mutual acquaintance at a dinner in Maitama. The man making the request is a local assembly candidate from Edo State, sharp in his agbada and smoother in his voice. He knows Haruna's hometown, calls him our son, and speaks as if they've shared a long history. The candidate's problem is simple. An upcoming rally needs fuel. Not a few jerry cans, but several thousand liters to run generators, transport supporters, and keep his campaign vehicles moving. Official supply has been delayed, whether by incompetence or by a rival's interference is left politely unclear. You have friends in the right places, the man says. Friends who can make things appear without red tape. Haruna understands immediately that this is not about logistics. It's about loyalty. Deliver now, and the candidate will remember. Refuse, and the opportunity closes before it's even begun. Within 3 days, Haruna arranges for 2 trucks to arrive at the rally site, each carrying enough fuel to run the event from start to finish. The delivery is smooth. No questions at the gate, no receipt signed. On the day of the rally, music blares, banners wave, and the candidate's voice rises over the crowd, promising new roads and better schools. Haruna stays in the background, watching the fuel keep everything alive. A week later, the candidate wins his party's primary. That evening, Haruna receives a call. The voice on the line thanks him, promising that, when I'm in the house, you'll have a friend. It's the kind of promise that may mean nothing, or everything, depending on how carefully it's cultivated. Musa is less impressed. Over drinks, he warns Haruna that politics is a snake pit. They'll take your help, then forget your name, Musa says. Or worse, they'll remember it when the heat comes. Haruna nods, but says nothing. He knows Musa's caution is earned, but he also knows the value of having a seat, however small, at a political table. Over the months that follow, the candidate, now an elected official, calls Haruna twice more. Once for a discreet fuel purchase during a fuel station strike, and once to arrange transport for campaign materials to a district in the north. Each time, Haruna delivers, keeping the deals quiet and efficient. These favors aren't just transactions, they are investments. In Haruna's world, influence isn't built by contracts or signatures, but by a memory of who came through when no one else could. The politician may never invite him into the public spotlight, but Haruna doesn't need that. What he needs is a name that can open certain gates without explanation. Still, he remembers Ibrahim's warning about threads tangled with the wrong ones. Politics tangles faster than anything else. Haruna decides early that he will never put himself in a position where a politician's downfall drags him under. But for now, he's willing to tie this particular knot, loosely enough to cut, tightly enough to pull when he needs it. The Delta blockade begins with a rumor that moves faster than the tide. Haruna hears it first from a boatman in Bielsa. Militant youths have set up barricades along a key stretch of the Niger Delta waterways, claiming they won't allow oil shipments to pass until the government addresses unpaid community levies. By the next morning, the rumor is fact, confirmed by calls from 2 different contacts, each describing stalled boats and tense standoffs under the dripping mangroves. This blockade is not the work of petty thieves. It's organized. The youths wear matching armbands, carry rifles, and post sentries at both ends of the channel. They've chosen their spot well, a narrow choke point where the water bends sharply, leaving no alternate path without adding hours to the journey. In this business, hours can be the difference between profit and seizure. One of Haruna's shipments is already en route when the blockade begins. He spends the day on the phone, weighing options. Musa urges him to pull the boats back entirely. Better to lose a day than the whole cargo, Musa says. Idaf, more aggressive, suggests sending extra men to negotiate with the blockade in person, his tone leaving little doubt about what kind of negotiation he means. Haruna chooses a third path. He calls an intermediary in the local community, a school teacher whose brother is part of the blockade leadership. The message he sends is simple. Let the boats pass tonight, and a discreet payment will arrive within 24 hours. It's not a bribe, not exactly. He frames it as assistance for the youth program. The militants have been promising their villages. That evening, he gets word from a trusted boat pilot. The armbands stepped aside, waving them through with a warning to respect the people. The cargo reaches its destination before dawn. The payment is delivered as promised, in cash, small denominations, wrapped in brown paper. The blockade continues for another week, snarling other operators' routes. Haruna's shipments, however, keep moving, never directly through the choke point again, but through an improvised side channel only a few locals know. It's slower, riskier in terms of navigation, but it avoids the attention the main blockade is attracting from both the military and the press. This episode teaches Haruna two things. First, that raw force isn't always the best tool in a volatile situation. Second, that influence doesn't have to be loud to be effective. It can be built in the quiet handshakes of people who aren't officially in the game. By the time the blockade ends, Haruna's rivals are behind schedule, their buyers frustrated, their margins thinner. He hasn't just avoided loss, he's gained ground. And in a business where timing is everything, that's as good as a victory. Still, he knows the Delta remembers these moments. Today's ally could be tomorrow's obstacle, and the same armbands that waved him through might one day be blocking his path again. In the Delta, the water always carries both opportunity and danger. It just changes shape depending on the tide. The river escape comes on a night heavy with the smell of rain, though the clouds haven't opened yet. Haruna is supervising a transfer from a concealed tap site deep in the Delta to a mid-sized holding boat bound for Wari. The operation is running on schedule. Lanterns dimmed, engines idling low. When the first warning comes, a short burst of static on the handheld radio followed by the words, "Military patrol, 5 minutes out." In the Delta, 5 minutes is the blink of an eye. Haruna doesn't waste time asking how close they are or whether the report is accurate. He signals the loaders to drop what they're doing and secure the barrels already on deck. The rest, 6 full drums, are left behind, rolled quietly into the mud under the mangrove roots. The pilot kicks the engine into a low hum, steering the boat away from the tap site but not toward open water. Instead, Haruna points to a narrow side channel, barely wide enough for the hull. The crew hesitates. They know this path is shallow and tangled, a nightmare in daylight and worse at night. Haruna's voice stays calm. Go. Branches scrape the sides as they push into the passage, the air thick with the damp scent of leaves and brine. Twice, the boat stalls, forcing the men to rock it loose with careful shifts of weight. Behind them, the deeper thrum of a military patrol boat grows louder, then fades, then swells again, circling, searching. At one bend, Haruna orders the lantern extinguished. They sit in darkness so complete that the only shapes are the faint glint of water and the outline of the man nearest him. The patrol boat's engine passes within earshot, the sound vibrating in Haruna's ribs. A beam of light sweeps the main channel just beyond the mangroves, so close that the water under it gleams silver. Then, slowly, the sound drifts away downstream. It takes another hour to reach the open river through a winding series of feeder creeks. When they finally emerge, the night air feels fresher, the stars sharp against the black sky. The pilot lets out a breath he's been holding since they entered the side channel. No one speaks about the 6 drums left behind. The priority now is survival, not salvage. By dawn, the cargo they saved is secured in a hidden yard. Haruna calls a contact to arrange retrieval of the abandoned drums before anyone else finds them. Mud keeps secrets, the man says. Haruna hopes he's right. The river escape isn't celebrated. There's no room for that. But it reinforces what Haruna has learned over and over. In this trade, the ability to disappear on short notice is as valuable as any route or contact. The Delta rewards those who can read its hidden exits and punishes those who think the only way forward is straight ahead. As the day heats up and the buzz of insects swells, Haruna lies back in his chair at the yard, eyes closed. The image of that narrow channel still runs in his mind, not as a place of fear, but as a reminder that sometimes the smallest paths are the surest way to stay alive. Courtroom whispers begin with a headline that Haruna wishes hadn't used his name. It appears in a small regional paper, tucked inside the business section. Local businessman linked to questionable oil logistics. There's no photo, just a few vague lines about unverified sources and ongoing investigations. Most people would miss it, but in Haruna's world, the smallest ripple can turn into a wave if left unchecked. 2 days later, he gets the summons. It's not a dramatic arrest, just a letter delivered by a polite court clerk who seems almost apologetic. Haruna is to appear in front of a magistrate to answer questions about a shipment seized on the Wari docks. No charges? Not yet. Just clarifications. He arrives at the courthouse dressed in a muted gray suit, the kind that makes him look like a mid-level consultant rather than a man who moves thousands of liters of crude through side channels. The building smells faintly of paper and damp stone. His lawyer, an older man with an expression permanently caught between boredom and alertness, whispers reminders. Answer only what's asked. Never guess. Never volunteer. Inside the courtroom, the questions are delivered in measured tones. Dates, locations, names of companies he's consulted for. Haruna keeps his voice even, speaking as though the matter is a simple misunderstanding. He describes his role as facilitating transportation solutions, never touching the words that might pull him into the quicksand. Pipeline, tapping, unregistered. More interesting than the questions are the glances exchanged between 2 men seated at the back of the room. Haruna recognizes one, a junior aide to the same honorable he met in Abuja months ago. The aide doesn't speak, but his presence says enough. Someone with influence is paying attention, perhaps ensuring this matter doesn't escalate beyond discomfort. When the session ends, the magistrate dismisses him with a curt nod. Outside, his lawyer leans close. "It's not over," he says. "They may call you again. But if certain people keep leaning in your direction, it won't go anywhere." Within a week, the whispers shift. The seized shipment is suddenly linked to a clerical error at the port. Haruna's name disappears from the conversation, replaced by a vague reference to unknown parties. The small regional paper prints a 1-sentence correction buried in the classifieds. For Haruna, the lesson is sharp. In the Delta, you guard your cargo. In Abuja, you guard your narrative. One can be taken by rivals, the other by rumor, and both can sink you if you're careless. That night, he calls the Honorable directly, keeping his tone light. They talk about nothing for several minutes before the man says, "I heard you had a minor inconvenience. Glad to see it resolved." The line goes quiet for a beat too long before the Honorable adds, "You should remember who your friends are." Haruna hangs up, knowing exactly what that means. In court, the law is one thing, but in the halls behind it, influence writes the real verdicts. The Kingmaker's circle is not a place Haruna ever planned to enter, but once inside, he understands why men will bend themselves into knots to stay there. It begins with an invitation to a small gathering in Maitama, not a public rally or flashy fundraiser, but a private dinner in the garden of a retired governor's home. The air is cool, perfumed with hibiscus, and the guests are a mix of political figures, oil executives, and men like Haruna, whose influence exists off the books. Here, politics is spoken in the language of exchange. A senator wants to secure funding for a project in his constituency. A party treasurer needs quiet backing for an internal leadership bid. A regional power broker wants a particular candidate removed from contention. No one asks for money directly. They talk about support, logistics, friends who can help smooth the way. Haruna arrives as a guest of the Honorable. He's done favors for before. The Honorable introduces him to 3 men within the first hour, each handshake lingering just long enough to signal that introductions are more than polite gestures. They're openings. Haruna listens far more than he speaks, learning who holds sway over which ministries, which contracts are being contested, and which elections are quietly considered foregone conclusions. By the end of the evening, he's agreed to look into a fuel supply issue for a campaign in Cross River State, and to arrange a discreet meeting between 2 rivals in the oil sector who currently pretend not to know each other. These aren't orders. They're opportunities to demonstrate usefulness. In this circle, the man who solves problems quietly earns the kind of currency that outlives cash. The more Haruna engages, the clearer the mechanics become. The Kingmaker's circle doesn't operate on titles or party lines. It operates on outcomes. Those who can deliver are kept close. Those who fail are frozen out, their calls unanswered. Money is the lubricant, but trust, carefully rationed and fiercely guarded, is the engine. Musa is skeptical when Haruna tells him about the dinner. "You're mixing with men who have no shame about stepping on the people who feed them," he says. Haruna doesn't disagree, but he sees the other side. These are the men who can, with a single phone call, turn an investigation into a closed file or open a contract worth millions. Weeks later, Haruna sees the benefits firsthand. A delay at the port threatens one of his biggest shipments of the year. Rather than work through layers of bureaucracy, he calls one of the men from that garden dinner. By the next morning, the paperwork is stamped and the shipment is moving again. He understands now why they call it the Kingmaker's circle. The men inside may never appear on ballots, but they decide who does and who wins. Haruna isn't aiming for a throne, but he knows that standing close enough to the men who place kings can make a man untouchable, as long as he remembers one thing. In this circle, loyalty is measured in actions, not words. Family fractures begin quietly, the way small cracks spread through a wall long before it collapses. At first, it's subtle. A cousin who stops calling, a brother who avoids visiting when Haruna is home in Edo. Success in Haruna's world has never been about public displays of wealth, but even quiet prosperity leaves a trail. new furniture in his mother's house, school fees paid in advance, groceries arriving without anyone asking. In a place where everyone's business is common knowledge, silence can be as loud as bragging. The first open tension comes from his younger brother, Suleiman, who has been struggling to keep a small auto repair shop afloat. One evening, during a family gathering, Suleiman makes a pointed comment about some people who have connections but don't use them to help their own. Haruna lets it pass, but the glance that follows tells him exactly who some people means. Other relatives are less confrontational, but their behavior shifts. A nephew who once greeted him warmly now only calls when he needs a loan. An aunt asks outright if he can find space for her son in his business, though she never specifies which business she means. Refusing such requests isn't just awkward. It risks creating resentments that can linger for years. The deeper fracture, though, is with his mother. She's proud of his success, but uncomfortable with the shadows around it. One afternoon, while he's visiting, she asks if he can leave this oil matter and put his skills into something safer. Her voice is soft, but the weight of worry is heavy. Haruna tells her not to concern herself, that he's careful, but he sees in her eyes that she doesn't believe safety is possible where he works. Tensions sharpen when a small piece of gossip reaches the family compound. Someone claims to have seen Haruna meeting with politicians who deal in black oil. The source is unreliable, but the rumor spreads. In a family already divided by suspicion and envy, it lands like fuel on embers. Some relatives treat him with newfound deference, others withdraw further, muttering about how nothing good comes from mixing with such people. Haruna doesn't confront them. He knows that in families, just like in business, direct conflict often hardens positions instead of softening them. Instead, he adjusts, spending less time in Edo, sending money quietly through intermediaries, keeping conversations light when he does visit. Still, the distance gnaws at him. The boy who once dreamed by the riverbank with his cousins now finds himself calculating which of them might talk too much if pressed. It's an uncomfortable truth. In his line of work, trust isn't granted by blood, and the people closest to you can sometimes be the most dangerous. By the time the year turns, Haruna has accepted that the fractures won't heal on their own. He'll keep the family connections that can be maintained without risk, and let the others fade. In his world, sentiment is a luxury, and luxuries get you noticed by the wrong eyes. International eyes turn toward Haruna long before his name appears on any official list. At first, it's small signs, questions from buyers about overseas opportunities, inquiries from traders who speak with accents not native to the Delta. He notices more foreign-flagged vessels anchoring farther out from the ports, their crews rarely seen on shore, but their cargo always finding its way inland. The first direct contact comes through a Lebanese intermediary who runs an import business in Lagos. Over a quiet lunch in Victoria Island, the man hints at a European refinery willing to take crude from less conventional sources if the logistics can be guaranteed. He never uses the word stolen, and Haruna never uses the word buyer. The dance of implication is enough to make the message clear. Not long after, Haruna hears from a different source, this one through the Honorable, that certain Western agencies have begun monitoring illicit flows from the Delta. The phrasing is careful, but the meaning is blunt. Foreign investigators are mapping not just the oil routes, but the people moving along them. Haruna knows this attention is both a threat and a strange form of validation. The world is watching, because the scale of the trade has become impossible to ignore. In Abuja, he overhears a conversation at a hotel bar between two oil executives, one Nigerian, one British. They're discussing persistent leakage in supply, but the British man's tone is clipped, his frustration obvious. He mentions how off-book channels are undermining market stability, and Haruna catches the way his eyes scan the room before lowering his voice. It's a reminder that even in casual settings, there are ears listening for more than gossip. One evening, Edaf warns him outright. Your name came up in a conversation I wasn't meant to hear. Foreigners, they're not here for headlines. They're here to make examples. Haruna doesn't dismiss it. He knows foreign agencies operate differently from local law. They play a longer game, and when they move, it's with precision. In response, Haruna begins tightening his operations. He distances himself from the most visible routes, shifts certain transactions to intermediaries 2 or 3 steps removed from him, and ensures no paperwork or digital trail links his name to shipments. His Abuja apartment becomes even more minimalist. No files, no cash in plain sight. Nothing that suggests a man moving more than legal cargo. Yet the interest from abroad also brings opportunities. Foreign buyers are willing to pay premiums for steady supply, especially when geopolitical tensions disrupt official markets. Haruna finds himself in quiet talks with a contact in Dubai who claims to have clients in South Asia. The conversations are cautious, each side feeling out the other's reliability. He knows the danger is real. Foreign agencies can bring a level of pressure that even the most connected local politician might hesitate to counter. But Haruna also knows that in the oil trade, attention is inevitable. The question isn't whether international eyes will find you, but whether you can control what they see when they do. The Oil Union Gala is one of those events where appearances matter more than speeches, and Haruna understands from the moment he steps into the lobby that this is a room where images are currency. The venue is a polished hotel ballroom in Abuja, its high ceilings draped with fabric in deep green and gold. Waiters in crisp white jackets move silently between tables carrying trays of champagne flutes, the hum of conversation mixing with the soft spill of a live jazz band. He's here as a guest of the honorable, though the invitation comes with an unspoken assignment: be seen, meet the right people, and leave a certain impression. Haruna wears a tailored navy suit, not the flashiest in the room, but cut well enough to suggest quiet success. A simple watch on his wrist, no heavy jewelry, nothing that invites unnecessary questions. The guests are a blend of oil executives, senior union leaders, ministry officials, and the occasional foreign consultant. The speeches from the stage are polite and predictable, tributes to partnership, growth, and community development. But Haruna knows the real work of the evening happens off stage, in the quiet corners and at the tables near the back where the lighting is just dim enough. He moves through the crowd with practiced ease, shaking hands, exchanging a few words, letting people place his face without necessarily placing his role. At one table, he's introduced to the president of a regional oil workers union, a man whose public image is all about defending labor rights, but whose handshake carries the weight of someone accustomed to moving favors quietly. They speak about supply stability in the Delta, a conversation vague enough to pass as casual but layered with subtext. Later, Haruna drifts toward the bar, where 2 mid-level ministry officials are laughing over some shared memory. One turns to him, recognizing his name from logistics discussions months earlier. They talk about transport bottlenecks, and Haruna offers a casual observation about alternate routing through lesser-used depots. It's just enough detail to show he knows the terrain, without revealing which parts of it belong to him. Throughout the night, he's careful to maintain balance, visible but never dominant, engaged but never lingering too long in one group. In a room like this, being too eager is as dangerous as being invisible. People remember the one who monopolized their time, and they remember the one they couldn't quite place, but knew they'd seen before in a room full of power. By the time the gala winds down, Haruna has spoken to half a dozen figures who matter, gathered 3 phone numbers worth saving, and made no promises he can't keep. The Honorable claps him on the shoulder as they leave, murmuring, "You looked like you belonged." In Haruna's line of work, that's the highest compliment the night could have given him. The gala hasn't changed his position in the network overnight, but it has reinforced a truth he's been leaning into for years. In the oil trade, legitimacy isn't just about paperwork. It's about being recognized in rooms where deals are sealed with a handshake and remembered with a nod. Quiet retirement plan is not the kind of thing Haruna talks about openly, not even with Musa. In his world, stepping back is more dangerous than stepping forward. Everyone wants to know why, and suspicion can be as lethal as debt. Still, the thought has been growing in him like a slow tide. The idea that there must be a way to leave without setting off alarms. It starts as a mental exercise. He asks himself, if I stop tomorrow, what would I need? The answers are practical. Assets no one can trace, properties under clean names, accounts in places where the banks don't ask too many questions. But beneath the logistics is a more fragile question. How do you leave a world that knows too much about you? He begins making small moves. Certain contacts are quietly handed over to trusted intermediaries. Shipments he once oversaw personally are now coordinated 2 steps removed from him. The aim is to make himself less central, to let the network learn to function without his direct hand. If done slowly enough, it will look like natural drift, not withdrawal. At night in his Abuja apartment, he sketches possibilities in his head. A guest house on the coast, maybe in Ghana, where his name means nothing. A small stake in a legitimate import business, just enough to keep him moving on paper. A life where the only calls that wake him are from friends, not fixers. The challenge is timing. Leave too early, and he abandons the leverage he spent years building. Leave too late, and the tide may turn before he can get clear. Haruna watches the market shifts, the political winds, the whispers about foreign agencies tightening their net. Every piece of news is weighed not just for its immediate effect, but for what it says about the horizon. Musa notices the change, though Haruna never admits it outright. "You're moving like a man trying to ghost his own shadow," Musa says one evening over beer. Haruna only smiles, because the truth is not far from that. He has no illusions about disappearing completely. Someone like him always leaves a trace. But if he can narrow that trace, make it too faint to follow, then maybe the delta will let him fade into its memory, instead of pulling him back under. For now, he waits, prepares, and moves carefully. A quiet retirement isn't about stopping. It's about stepping so lightly that one day, when they look for you, they realize you've been gone for years. So now, as the story folds into stillness, picture Haruna not on a riverbank in the dark, but somewhere far from the humid press of the delta. The air is clearer, touched with salt from a calm sea. The sound that fills the night is not the rattle of boat engines or the low hum of a generator, but the steady hush of waves arriving and leaving. He sits where the horizon is wide enough to make all the old routes seem small. The lines he once traced in his mind, those channels of oil, of favors, of debts, blur in the distance, fading into something almost harmless. In this place, the maps are different. They lead only to the market at the edge of town, to the small harbor where fishermen mend their nets, to a cafe where the coffee is strong and the mornings are slow. Here, time moves without the weight of consequence. He can let it pass without calculation, without watching for signs of trouble in the way a stranger stands, or the tone a friend uses when they say his name. It's a place where nights aren't measured in risks taken, but in how long the breeze lingers before the air grows still again. For you, listening now, let the hum of this imagined shore replace whatever noise the day left in you. Let the water's rhythm slow your own breathing, each inhale and exhale moving like the tide. And as your eyes grow heavier, picture the horizon pulling a soft line between now and tomorrow, one that doesn't need to be crossed until you're ready. Sleep well.